I like to do narratives sometimes. A narrative is just a story. Sometimes it's based off of Bible stuff, sometimes others. And this is a story I put together 18 years ago now that was asking the question, you know, we see all the stuff that God's doing at Christmas time, and I was asking the question, what were God's enemies up to at that time? What was going on in the world where the devil lives and what he's up to and what's going on in his world? And so this is kind of a story told from his perspective. First time we did this, I dyed my hair red. It was a wild thing, and I had a full on like red suit. It was awesome. So you don't get all that stuff, but this is a story called "The Snake, an Imposter, and a Child." He thought that he could keep it a secret from me, like I wouldn't find out. That's how arrogant you can get when you're at the top. And then when I almost toppled him, knocking him off his pearly throne, he goes and saying stuff like, I wanted him to know. I removed the blinders from him. It would do him some good. Do me some good, indeed. Underestimating me. That's what I think he's doing. The reality is that I'm sure he's just torn up because I'm not his lackey, his perfect little angel anymore. It irks him to know that I'm out on my own and I'm doing just fine. Better than fine. People love me. And he thinks that pulling a little stunt like this is going to bring him any fans. I don't think so. You see, in this business, you give the customer what he wants, or you go home empty-handed. I may not have all the niceties I had when I was working for him, but what I lack in resources, I make up in ingenuity and talent and just plain common sense. The result is that I'm known across the globe as the only one who can take care of every individual desire of each person that I do business with. I mean, I offer the world a better way. Not just a better way, but an easier way. If you mess with what he has to offer, you'll spend a lifetime just trying to figure out his instructions for things. And real men don't need instructions. I mean that's one of my life lessons I live by. What's the world looking for? Well, it's a better way. Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. And you've seen the world. What it needed was someone to set it right. The prophets wrote a leader, a king of kings, a prince of princes. Sounds simple enough. But to find somebody worthy of such a position is difficult. You see, humanity in its very nature seems destined to self-destruct. Every person who demonstrated the potential to be that leader that I needed failed in his ultimate purpose. Sure, many have done some great things for me, but getting me that one decisive blow, that victory that would at last prove that I'm superior, it eluded me until now. You see, my many hard years of work, my patient waiting, my tireless vigilance, and finally the time was right, but little did I know that my mortal enemy was at that very moment plotting against me. You see, we both know the heart of man. Some say he knows it best because he invented it, but I improved it. He had no idea what he had created when he made it. The deep recesses, the winding passages, the closed doors. I can make it like a vault, locked up so tight. Name me a man that doesn't have something that he wants to hide, to keep secret, and I'm the only one who can help you find that extra little space, that needed protection for even the dirtiest little ideas. Still, the heart of man is that of a follower. You know, with as much time as mankind wastes on talk of freedom and individuality, it's amazing how easily one can shape the thoughts of millions with just a word spoken by the right man at the right place, the right time. And so I took it upon myself to fulfill those prophecies that were looked for. A mighty king? No problem. Full of wisdom? Sure, I'd make sure of it. A prince of peace? There'd never be a rival to it. Just Merciless justice will be his trademark. Then, and then alone, would the world be as I had envisioned it, the perfect model of my own demand. But where would I find such a person to live up to such lofty expectations? Where would a human full of weaknesses that I can't mend be found to take arms for me, wage war on the earth on my behalf? Years of failures taught me much of this process. You get somebody that's too arrogant and they stop following what I wanted to do. Somebody with too little ambition and they're just satisfied with smaller victories. Too harsh with too little strength, and people are gonna revolt. Not harsh enough, and revolutions happen nonetheless. Too virtuous. What am I going to do with that? With every success that I appeared to develop, I'd find two more problems in my plans. But patience has always been my strong suit. One failure would only lead to another opportunity, and then by accident I stumbled on it. Each failure began to exhibit the characteristics of the previous ones. You are what you eat. What I needed to do was find leaders who would scavenge the scraps of their enemies and incorporate those ideas that were necessary to create the world, my world, that I would use to prepare for my leader, the one who I would anoint to take over the world. I was surprised how easily this began to take place. The amorous with which one nation would have towards another's success made creating that perfect culture easier and easier. To one nation I would teach brutality, to the next strategy, to the next philosophy, until finally I had woven my views of the world into every aspect of society. The Greek Empire had ambition. They had organization. They had direction. They were that last sacred cow. While the people of my enemy wallowed around in poverty, dejection, and insignificance, their glory fading quickly from view, thanks in no little part to my workings, I'd managed to unify the world. The world was primed. But the Greek leaders were not willing, or maybe they weren't able to take that final step into immortality. I needed somebody who would respect the work that I had done for these last hundreds and hundreds of years. But someone who would also listen to me as I led him across the threshold into a new empire of power, of control, of victory. You see, I had learned the lessons of frail human kingdoms, and the lesson that they don't last. So I always tried to have one or two nations on the rise during the height of their power. Inevitably, one would stop being useful to my cause, and I would need to begin to remove that one and start the process over. I'd had my fingers in many pots during this great success of the Greek Empire, but there was one in particular that showed tremendous promise. Rome. I was set up as a republic, and my first time working with such a group, but it proved to be the final key in my great plan to bring once and for all order into this world. You see, both a leader and a senate are easy enough to manipulate to my advantage, but the one big plus about having both is that I could use one to keep the other in line, and it worked. I don't want to be too modest because I'm a genius. I had my Messiah, the deliverer of the world, the bearer of peace. I wanted the world to cry out, "Hail Caesar!" You see, Julius Caesar was a masterpiece. The people loved him. The world loved him. He even loved himself. Every inch of Rome, every city under their control, every coin used for business would bear the image of Caesar, my anointed one, to rule the world. The image of leaders to come, the destiny of my vigilance, the overthrow of every work of God. Through his body, though his body was mortal, the image, the vision, the rule of Caesar I had meticulously designed to be immortal. Pax Romana. The peace of Rome would dominate the world. the world would unite. They would unite under me, under Beelzebub, under the great fallen star, under the prince of demons. I was created with power by God. My destiny, though, is to replace him as God. He made the world in his vision, man in his image. Now the world was becoming my vision, and it bore my image, and my victory was near, and it would be complete. I mean, majestic, regal, powerful, the irresistible, the immovable Rome stood forever as power. The world now spun on power. I had willed it to be like this, and that's what it became. The lust for power is the greatest moving agent in the world today. Families will crumble over struggles for power. Nations will topple as leaders vie for power. Even God's own religious leaders will destroy, maim, and humiliate one another for the power to represent their faith. By the time any one of these squeezes out enough power to dominate, whatever good intentions were planned can easily be turned to evil out of that simple desire to maintain power. However, in the face of this juggernaut of a nation that I had carved out, rumors began to spread that my enemy was attempting to introduce his own Messiah into the world. Let him come. I had no fear. My empire had suffered its first loss, and Caesar fell at the hands of traitors, but my design to produce forever an heir to the throne would carry on. My plan succeeded without fault. The new Caesar, Caesar Augustus, was in control, and Caesar lived on and prospered. My enemy God could not stop a Caesar like this. Let his Messiah come. He would find only ruin in its path. As usual, God was a day late. God was an hour short. I had the edge, the power, the time, the people, the world, and he had nothing. He had a ragtag group of followers, more often unfaithful than not. Still, my enemy insisted on carrying on with his ill-conceived plans. What did he think he could gain by bringing his Messiah into the world now? Surely he saw that the world was mine. Still, I had to make Rome secure. Most certainly God would mold a bold warrior, a charismatic leader, a persuasive orator, a shrewd strategist that he would place in some country to attempt to topple my empire. My Caesars had to come down hard. They had to keep vigilant watch. They had to be aware of their ever-present dangers. New garrisons were dispatched throughout the world to make sure every king, every governor, prefect, and advisor was made aware of where their loyalties were supposed to lie. Caesar declared a census to make account of everyone in his kingdom. It would be much easier to root out and kill any threat that my people on earth already knew, and if they understood who they were dealing with. And then I put the plans into action to have Caesar actually declared God. How could Yahweh's leader be godly if he opposed the God of this world, if he opposed Caesar? Egypt had been set straight by the destruction of Antony and Cleopatra. Persia was kept in line by a legion of my men. Israel was held in check by the menacing Herods, another family that I'm quite proud of. And the Far East still remained safely superstitious, but spiritually primed to take my message to any willing listener. However unlikely, though it was, out of the East that I first began to understand my enemy's devices. My people keep a close contact with the mystics, the wise men, the astrologers scattered throughout the world, but rumblings and rumors were spreading that a group of my most talented and influential workers in these mystical arts were becoming slowly unresponsive to me. Granted, these setbacks, they've occurred throughout time, but God chooses someone with whom he's going to work, and slowly he begins to turn those individuals away from me and towards him. But I'd never seen him try it with that many people so far east and people of such influence. Could it be that his king would come from Asia, change the landscape of the world with one quick strike? More investigation was needed, and that's where God Almighty faltered in his plans. You see, his new wise men, they were too loose-lipped. They practically spilled God's entire plan right there to their entire nation. They said a king has been born in Israel. They have been alerted of this by a sign, a star they had seen in the sky, and they were on their way to anoint this king, and they would never get the chance if I had my way. But what to do? I should have guessed Israel. You know, there's no real power, no real strength in Israel, but God always had a weakness for them. Still, that's why I have my people there. So Herod won't bear this Messiah, that's certain. But if he does, he will simply dispose of him. Herod has no compunction when it comes to removing family on a whim. He has already killed 2 of his own sons. No, God would not use him, but who? The wise men would know. But it would take them months to get to Jerusalem. I would not need months, but only hours to figure out what was about to happen. Within moments of learning about the wise men's discovery, my messengers and fellow demons began streaking to my presence. The enemy had been sighted, and in numbers so large they could not be counted. The initial shock and the power of their commander had been so overwhelming that not even my most valiant servants could relate the message of these angels brought. Only that God's Messiah had been born that night in Bethlehem. I had gone east, fearful of the wise men, while God was preparing his rival, his warrior, his Messiah, right in the bosom of my power. I myself would descend on Bethlehem that night, wholly expecting something menacing to be barring my way. But the air was clear. The enemy was nowhere to be seen. He had revealed himself, thinking we would not come, but on we came. The might of my men swelled by the minute as we gathered strength of my demons from the Huns and China, India and Persia, a quarter of my entire forces with my fastest gathering even more from the other great countries. I sent special messengers to the demons around Herod and his advisors, and upon their arrival, Herod and his associates would be fixated against this new king. They would be prepared to take the most drastic action. And those wise men would lead him right to this prince that Herod would then have killed. I looked at the stars for the first time in 1,000 years. They had been unchanging. I had lost all interest in them, but sure enough, that star was there. A new and different light in the heavens. A good astrologer might have been able to discern what country the star hung over. A great one perhaps could have located an area within a few cities, but for me, that star was a pinpoint screaming out, "Here is my king!" Both a challenge, and such an arrogant jester. This new Christ, he would not make it through the night. The world was able to only hold one anointed, and I already had him on the most powerful throne in the world. We arrived late that evening. A gathering of shepherds had begun to make their way to that same spot. My perfect opportunity. I would simply just latch on to the heart of one of these shepherds. I do it all the time. Sneak in as their invited guest. Then in one blow, eternity would be satisfied, and I would become God. But for whatever reason, my hand slipped off the heart on which I tried to grasp. I attempted a second time, but the results were the same. I went to another, and the hearts of these men were unlike any I had ever tried to latch onto before, like a young child's heart that can't be grabbed. Something had so filled their hearts that there was absolutely no place for me, no place for my men to grab onto. I unleashed my fury, first my strongest, then my quickest, and then my most agile, my wisest, my bravest, my most vicious, and then all together. But there was no way we could touch them. The angels in the field, the voices and songs had somehow managed to fill these simple shepherds' hearts with strength beyond reason, but no, they must not be shepherds. Maybe they only feign simplicity. I would not accept that simple people could stand up against me. God must have some sort of mighty warriors, his new king inside, so he's placed fearsome guards and stalwart priests around this ramshackled stable in order to try to deceive me. Oh, I'm not a child to be toyed with. These warriors would not be used or manipulated. Therefore, they would be assaulted. I organized such a force that tales would be written about the ferocious thrashing that was placed on God's servants, his guards, and most importantly, his Messiah that night. And with blinding speed, we charged the feeble stable, penetrating its walls, its doors, its windows, its ceilings simultaneously, converging on the mark where the child would be guarded. You know, only a few of my most valiant generals and myself are even to recollect images of what occurred after that. I mean, my generals have prepared an official statement of the events that occurred that night. The entire event was a ruse, a trap, a farce designed by the enemy. Most demons only remember the blinding light, piercing their eyes, burning their faces, pushing them back with the force of a tidal wave. Impossible to fight against, compelling in its nature, destructive to any demon who would choose to linger in its presence. My leaders, however, properly deduced that the light was a light that we had not spoken of for centuries. It was the light of God. None of my minions would ever know that. They would be content to know that God had provided the mightiest of angels with some supernatural artifact to destroy us, and that it had gone wrong since none were destroyed, only blinded, wounded, confused, and repelled. They would feel our victory came in our ability to resist this new power of God. But my generals, they knew. They knew that God himself was in that room. And why he chose not to undo us remains a mystery to them. However, I saw what was really in that room. I saw, and I know, not because God wanted me to know. My knowing jeopardizes everything he has planned. No, I know because I'm powerful. I know because I'm strong. I know because I'm going to resist. You see, what I saw puzzled me for many years. I recognized the light the moment we entered. That light that I once sat next to. How can I not recognize the glory of God? But what I saw that no other demon saw was where that light came from. That simple room contained a stable full of horses and donkeys, chickens, and a group of people huddled around a trough. And the light revealed the true nature of everyone around that feeding bin. Shepherds, ordinary shepherds, not warriors, not priests, but just shepherds, whose hearts were now visibly filled with peace and joy and with the Spirit of God, so full that my legions could not enter or even hang onto the corner of their hearts. And then there was a couple. They were simple, plain folks, but you could see the mark of God on them. They were off limits, specially reserved for his works. Who were they? I did not know until many years later. A simple girl and a carpenter. And out of them would come God's anointed one, his Messiah, the Christ. But their simplicity turned to majesty as I gazed down at the child. And then it hit me. The light nearly blinded me. It began forcing me back out of the little hut, but I saw him, the baby. He was God. Not as I had designed Caesar to be. He was God. Immortal. Invisible. In the flesh. Then the prophet's words rang out into my ears. He'll be called Emmanuel, God with us. I mean, that was the last image I had of the night. I too was expelled from the presence into a silent night. My army, they could do no mischief that night. They were scattered and wounded. The enemy didn't move. They were still. And the world for a moment was quiet as I left that place deep in thought. It took years to reorganize my ranks. The wounded, they healed slowly. The blind eventually recovered, but the scars remained. My people tried to kill that baby, but he escaped. Where, I don't know. But he will show up again. And this time, I will not be taken by surprise. Plain parents, a wrecked stable, dirty shepherds. He was trying to keep this child from my grasp. But mark my words. This child will one day worship me, or he will die. And should he somehow attempt to come to power, let there be fair warning that the people will rally to me. For I am the world's true king, the prince of this age, the snake who brought down God's paradise, the deceiver who molded an impostor into a Messiah, and the victor of this child. And when he is killed, then who's going to stand against me?
Indeed, Satan tried to kill this child who was named Jesus, but called the Christ. But God would protect him and his family, first by sending them off to Egypt in secrecy, then returning them to their hometown in Nazareth. The boy grew up like ordinary boys with extraordinary understanding, peace, grace, and faith. Satan did not stop there, but he would attempt to cajole, bribe, and even force concessions from Jesus as he grew. But in his wisdom, Jesus resisted and went on to become a great rabbi, a teacher of teachers. Sadly, though, Satan did find willing accomplices throughout the region and would attempt to hinder Jesus' teaching at every step. He did not act like the Messiah that Satan had expected, but rather was a model of humility and generosity. Satan worked tirelessly, nonetheless, to put down Jesus in his works, and eventually was able to fulfill his ultimate desire. A corrupt religious system and a power-starved political leader conspired to crucify Jesus unjustly. But do not cry. Nothing that Satan has done in the past, nothing he did to Jesus, and nothing he does today is a mystery to God. Jesus was killed on God's schedule, not Satan's, and when Satan did orchestrate the events of Jesus' death, he unwittingly orchestrated the cause of his downfall. You see, salvation for a hurting world entered in when Jesus gave up his life on that cross. There's a mark that you can receive that makes you off limits to Satan. It is Jesus. You see, Jesus died, but to the great distress of Satan, he rose again. And if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you too can be saved.